I'll start off with the ingredients: 70 grams of butter, divided into about 12 even cubes, 300 ml can of sweetened condensed milk, a roll of parchment paper, and then your ingredients for the chocolate are 300 grams of butterscotch chips, 300 grams of semi-sweet chocolate chips, and you want a shallow baking pan. Here you can see there are 300 grams each of this brand. Whatever brand you want to use is fine, as long as you're around close to 300 grams each for each layer. The first thing you want to do to get it out of the way is completely scrape clean your can of sweetened condensed milk. This one happens to be low fat, but it doesn't have to be. Alright, so it's hard to get out of the can, so that's why I'm recommending do it now before you're kind of halfway through and doing it last minute. So put that in a bowl that you can easily manage later. So the butter, you can use salted or unsalted, doesn't matter really. I use salted, that's what I had on hand. And you can see there the tray is a rectangular shaped metal tray, but non-stick. You can use a glass as well. Doesn't matter if it's non-stick, we're going to be adding parchment paper anyway. We're going to line it with that. So just a 9-inch, 7 to 9 inch tray, either square or rectangular, is a good size for this recipe. And you want to divide your butter into cubes because you're going to split that in half. So there's 12 cubes. I'm going to use 6 for the first step. So here you can see on my stove I have about 2 liters roughly, or half a gallon of water coming up to a simmer. And then I back it off a little bit after that. But you get your bowl warm for a few minutes, and then you're going to add your first layer, whatever you want that to be. This one's going to be butterscotch. And these chips melt down fairly quick compared to chocolate. There's less kind of heavy compounds in there, so it breaks down fairly quickly and melts quickly compared to the chocolate layer. So you'll find this one's a little bit easier to work with at the beginning. So I've added my 6 cubes of butter on top of the chips and half of my condensed milk sweetened. So just roughly split it in half, it doesn't really matter. And at some point that bowl will get fairly hot, so you're gonna, at first you can handle it by hand, but later on you may need an oven mitt or a Teflon hand cover or something, okay, or silicone. So at first it looks really rough. You're just gonna kind of mix everything together and scoop the bottom. It's not gonna burn on you because you have a fairly low heat. So this is low and slow. Kind of have to stick with it. So give it a stir for about a minute, then give yourself a little bit of a break, and then stir again, and you keep going. And it takes roughly 10 to 12 minutes to get it down to the proper consistency, but it really depends on the ingredients of the chips. You can also use obviously baking chocolate or whatever, but this is a very quick recipe, and these are readily available as well, so that's why I use that brand. Okay, so this is what you're going to pretty much end up with after probably 10 to 12 minutes of staying with it and stirring. You really do have to give it a good stir to get that heat to go through the whole mixture so it's nice and consistent. You don't want any chunks. So you could use white chocolate, butterscotch, whatever is a little bit different than the top layer or the other layer. You could even do 2 types of brown chocolate too, like a dark and a light or something. But it's fun to come up with the 2 layers, especially for a presentation. Okay, so I'm just going to roughly measure out my parchment paper and place it over the tray. What you see off to the side there are large paper clips. I do sometimes use medium paper clips, but they're meant to hold the paper in place. It makes it a lot easier to manage when you're kind of pouring everything in and spreading it out. So whatever you need to do to keep that paper in place, but these large paper clips tend to work well. So try to press it down into the corners as best you can. You don't have to be too fancy. Give yourself a little bit extra paper on the sides. And then we're just going to scoop in our first layer. You have to work fairly quickly because once it cools down, obviously it's going to start to solidify. So have everything laid out in advance and work fairly quickly. Have a good spatula to get everything out. I guess you could cut the parchment paper to be more tight into the corners. I'm not that concerned about the shape of the edges because we're going to trim those off at the end anyway. So even if it's not completely square rectangular, we're going to take care of that the next stage. So I wouldn't worry too much about how rough the edges are. So we're going to put it in the freezer for 30 minutes while we're doing the next layer. That will help it stiffen up so we can pour the next layer on. So you can use the same bowl, the same spatula. I just run hot water in my bowl and clean it up and then reuse it. Okay, so here we go with the semi-sweet chips. And we're going to add the other half of our butter. So 6 cubes. And again, it's 70 grams total. You could add a little more butter, makes it a little bit more fluid. But I found this is a pretty good ratio of fat to the rest of the ingredients. So we're going to scoop out the rest of our sweetened condensed milk. And same process. At first it's going to look really rough and you just keep stirring it until it slowly melts. The bowl gets kind of hot, so just be careful. You're dealing with some steam, so if you ever lift up the bowl, sometimes you get a little bit of steam escaping out of the bowl sides. So you could use a glass bowl as well, as long as it's meant for the oven. It's tempered glass, so you could use either or. I just tend to use stainless steel. It's a little bit easier to manage. There you can see after 30 minutes in the freezer, it's pretty much solid. And we're going to add our top layer on. I find the semi-sweet and the butterscotch is a nice flavor combination. You could use dark chocolate as well. So whatever your preference is for the two flavors, it doesn't really matter. And of course you could just do one layer of one flavor. I plan to do another video on that too. It's very quick. Okay, so I'm going to add some cling wrap on top and reclip it. And then I have a little roller that I use for pizza. I just just to even it off on the top and compress it a bit, I just give it a bit of a roll. You could just do it by hand as well, but the roller pushes everything down and flattens out the top fairly nicely. So later on, if you want, you can do a design in the top, but I don't think it really matters. So we're going to put it in the fridge. So a minimum of 1 hour, but preferably probably 3 hours for it to set up properly. We'll take the clips off. And the great thing about, of course, parchment paper is it's non-stick, so it comes right out of the pan. And you have now a solid sheet of fudge. And you can remove your cling wrap. And you want a fairly long chef's knife, or probably an 8-inch knife to do your cutting, because you want to cut right through from one side to the other. So you can see the edges are really rough, but we're going to take care of that in a minute. So just remove the parchment paper. You could just leave the parchment paper and cut right through, but I just use a cutting board. Okay, so first I want to cut it in half so you have two manageable large pieces to make your individual cuts. There you can see the two layers. Set that off to the side. And then we're just going to take off those rough edges, which usually the kids go for right away. That's what the first thing that's eaten is, those little pieces. So it's part of the treat. And then this is basically to your preference. If you're having a large number of people and you want smaller pieces, just keep in mind this is pretty rich. So with fudge, you don't generally give people a large piece, right? So you want to cut it into, 1 inch, 1.5, 2 inch pieces, but we're not talking like a 4-inch piece of fudge. So generally I just keep them fairly small. There's no nuts in this recipe, so it's nut free. And then again, this is preference, whatever size you guys want. And you can keep in the fridge or in the freezer for parties or get-togethers, or just a nice treat once in a while. So there you go. I hope everyone tries it. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe for next videos. Thank you.